The focus of today's video is to put a ton of microphones up against the Rode Podmic USB. I will leave a link in the description where you can go and download the raw audio for this comparison. That way you can chop it up, put whatever microphones you want up against each other if you'd like to. You can just do whatever you want with that file. I won't even judge you. You can get a little weird with it. But if you came from my review of the Rode Podmic USB, you know that these are the only two microphones that I compared in that review. So I think doing bigger comparisons like this every once in a while with similar style microphones will be cool. It'll help you kind of decide what might be good for you. Maybe you don't care about the built-in DSP, and maybe you just want the best sounding microphone completely unprocessed out of the box. Or maybe you're brand new, you don't have a processing chain, you don't have any plugins or any hardware or anything like that. And in that case, the Podmic USB might be a lot more appealing to you. But there are microphones out there that are less expensive that do still have some of those built-in features. So I will be comparing some of those to the Podmic USB. But one last thing before we get down and nerdy and start comparing these microphones is that I measure every single time I'm doing a comparison. I measure the distance away. In this case, I am going to be 5 inches away from all of these microphones. They're angled the same way. I know that camera angles and lens distortion and lighting, everything can kind of play a trick on your eyes to make it seem like maybe I'm closer to one because of the color or the shade of it or the shadows in the picture, but I am completely fair with these. I'm just as curious about these comparisons as you are, honestly. Probably even more. Let's go ahead and start by getting close to the Rode Podmic USB. Here's how that sounds when you get close to it, and here's the original Rode Podmic when you get close to it. And if you are going to test these microphones for plosives like some pickled peanutses, here's how that's going to sound with some pickled peanutses. But this is the first comparison, the OG Podmic versus the Podmic USB. Now I'm comparing the Lauten Audio LS208 to the Podmic USB, and this is actually more present day Bronson. I just wanted to jump in with a few notes. When I first started shooting this comparison, it was actually alongside the Podmic USB review that I put out quite a while ago. So this video has taken me a long time, and since then, Tom Buck actually came out with a big comparison comparing the Podmic USB to a bunch of different mics. Luckily, there isn't a ton of overlap between the microphones that we compare to the Podmic USB, so I just wanted to let you know if you want to hear more microphones compared to the Podmic USB, go check out Tom Buck's video. The Lauten Audio LS208 is actually a $600 microphone. It has some cool bells and whistles. It's actually a condenser microphone versus a dynamic microphone here. I currently have it in flat mode. It does have several switches. If you want to learn more about it, I do have a full review. But I did just switch it into the 10 kilohertz low pass filter mode, just so you can hear that against the Podmic USB. The other note I do want to make really quick, which is a silly note, but I get quite a few comments about it, so I'm just going to nip it right now. When I'm doing my plosive test between these microphones, the plosive test with pickled peanutses, I am saying peanut sizz. Peanuts, like peanuts, you eat peanuts, you know? Okay, don't get weird about it. Get your mind out of the gutter, first of all. I know, it's a silly word, but I like that word because it has a P and it has two S's that are pretty harsh sounding. So it's a good way to hear plosives and sibilants. But now I just put the LS208, which is actually one of my favorite microphones, into the 8 kilohertz low pass filter mode and the 50 hertz high pass filter mode. Versus, of course, the Podmic USB. Now I have some processing from the Rodecaster Pro 2 on the LS208 versus the Rode Podmic with the built-in DSP going into Rode Connect. These settings are not adjusted, they're just the standard settings. So you definitely could make them sound better if you altered them and adjusted them to your voice. But now we're going to go to past Bronson, and he's going to take you through a bunch of comparisons. Now we have the microphone that, quite honestly, I was the most curious to put up against the Rode Podmic USB when it came out. A little while ago, the XDM100 came out at $249, and the Rode Podmic USB just came out at $199. And the funny thing about it is that most people would argue that the Podmic USB is more capable since it has XLR and USB capabilities, when the XDM100 is only a USB microphone. Now that doesn't mean the XDM100 is bad. I was just kind of curious of the XDM100's future and if a lot of people would still get it once the Podmic USB came out. But if you get really close to the Rode Podmic, here's how that sounds. And if you get really close to the Rode XDM100, here's how that sounds. Now to test some plosives, some pickled penises, I am going to turn on the processing, or the DSP, as some people would say, here in just 1 second. Now, each of these have their standard DSP on. Currently, I am going into Unify with the XDM100. And now you're listening to the standard Rode Podmic settings in Rode Connect. Now, I did just turn on the high-pass filters as well, but I do not have the noise gate on. I'm just not the biggest fan of the noise gates. So here's how the Rode Podmic USB and the XDM100 stack up against each other. Now we have the very popular Shure MV7 plugged in through USB. This is a micro USB though, ewy. Then we have another popular microphone. I guess it's popular by association to the Podmic. But both of these microphones are very similar in a lot of ways. They have DSP options. Both have XLR and USB. But where they are slightly different is price. The Shure MV7 still comes in at $249, and you know the Podmic USB price at this point, $199. But I do want to say Rode Connect out of the box I like quite a bit more than like the Motive app from Shure. But both the MV7 series and the Podmic series are both very loved and very capable microphones, and I'm very capable of getting close to the Rode Podmic USB. Here's how that sounds. And now I'm close to the Shure MV7 to test that proximity effect. Now let's go ahead and get our pickled penises on, some pickled penises. And now let's go ahead and turn on some processing, some DSP. Now the DSP is enabled. The Shure MV7 has a limiter on, medium compression, and it has a presence boost on. And with the Podmic USB, I have a compressor on, the oral exciter, and the big bottom, which is basically just a fancy schmancy way of saying a bass boost and a presence boost. But here's how these two sound against each other with the DSP on. Once again, the Podmic USB and the Shure MV7. I'm sure you're just loving the repetition in this video. I'm sure you're loving it. Now you are listening to the Shure SM7b, the $400, very popular microphone for podcasting now. But it does require quite a bit of gain. And actually, I like it more for like aggressive vocals more than I like it for podcasting. But yeah, it does have like the broadcast look. It looks cool. It's definitely the reason a lot of microphones like this have a similar look. But right now you are listening to completely unprocessed audio, the Rode Podmic USB versus the Shure SM7b. For all of these XLR microphones, I am going into the Rodecaster Pro 2, keeping this comparison all Rode related. I'm even using Rode cables. But if I decide to get a little close to the Rode Podmic, check that proximity effect. Here's how it sounds. And here's how the SM7b sounds when I'm up close to it. But speaking of plosives with some pickled penises, let's check the pickled penises. Let's test the plosives. There's no processing with the SM7b in particular, but oh hey, there is actually a profile in the Rodecaster Pro 2. I'm going to turn it on. Now you are listening to the Podmic USB with DSP on, and now you are listening to the Shure SM7b going into the Rodecaster Pro 2 with their profile on. The only thing that I turned off was the noise gate. I just don't like to mess with it. It can just latch weird. It's weird. But one last time, this is the SM7b versus the Rode Podmic USB. Now I have the Rode Podmic USB going up against the Universal Audio SD1. Now this is one of the few microphones in this comparison that I have not reviewed. Since the Rode Podmic USB is kind of flashy, it's a good looking mic, I do just want to comment, I think that this mic is gorgeous. This matte white with like the black foam windscreen, I think it's a nice look. Now the SD1 isn't quite as expensive as the SM7b. This goes for $299, whereas you of course know the Podmic USB goes for $199. So this is $100 more. And really the only feature that the SD1 has, which don't get me wrong, is fine. It has a presence boost as well as a high pass filter. So I did just enable that presence boost there for you, so you can hear that versus the Podmic USB. And just for shits and gigs, we'll include the high pass filter as well as the presence boost. With the SD1, we are back in flat mode, something Mariah Carey would know nothing about because she's always nailing it. I don't know what I'm saying. So now if I decide to get close to the Podmic USB, here's how that sounds. And if I get close to the SD1, here's how that sounds. Now we can test the pickled penises. We'll test the pickled penises. And instead of putting processing on in post, I think that I'm just going to put the Rodecaster Pro processing, like the default dynamic processing, on the SD1. So now the DSP in the Rode Podmic USB is enabled, and now this is the standard processing with the SD1 going into the Rodecaster Pro 2. The only things that I have off are the high pass filter as well as the noise gate. But here's just a real quick comparison with some processed audio for the SD1 and the Podmic USB. Now we have the SE DCM6 versus the Rode Podmic USB. Who'd have thought? The SE DCM6 is an interesting microphone. It's actually an active dynamic microphone. However, you can make it inactive. There is this little dynamite button back here, which is like their mic booster. And I do have that engaged. And let me just say that the last microphone that I used, the SD1, the gain was set at 50 decibels. This is currently set at 12 decibels with the phantom power enabled. That's nuts. The SE DCM6 comes in at $149, and you know the price of the Podmic USB, $199. So I feel like if you don't care about the USB DSP aspect of the Podmic USB, maybe the DCM6 would be an option for you. But now if I get close to the Rode Podmic USB, here's how it sounds. And here's the proximity effect on the DCM6. Now to do a pickled penises test, once again, pickled penises. Now we'll go to some processing with some DSP and the built-in processing on the Rodecaster Pro 2 for dynamic microphones. So here is the DSP enabled on the Podmic USB versus the Rodecaster Pro processing on the SE DCM6. Here's just a quick example of that. Now let's go ahead and move on to yet another microphone. Now we have the SE Dynacaster, the one that started the Dynacaster line with the DCM3 and DCM6, which we just tried out the 6. And if you like the sound of the 6 and you don't care about the mic booster built in, you actually can get the DCM3 for $100. The SE Dynacaster does have that mic booster built in. It also has some filter switches on it. Currently, this is just like out of the box settings. That is with the booster enabled, as well as the first presence boost option, as well as a bass boost option. And if we get close to the Podmic USB, here's how it sounds. And if we get close to the SE Dynacaster, here's how it sounds. And a pickled penises test is, of course, in order. Pickled penises. I will say the SE Dynacaster does come with a windscreen as well. But in all reality, it actually does a pretty good job of plosive rejection, even without the windscreen on. But now we have the standard processing in the Rodecaster Pro enabled for the SE Dynacaster versus the Rode Podmic USB with the DSP enabled, with the compressor and the oral exciter and big bottom enabled. Now we have the Electro Voice RE20 plugged in, which is one of my favorite microphones of all time. It goes for $449, and we're putting it up against the Rode Podmic USB, and you know the price of it, it's $199. Now the RE20 is just an XLR microphone that you plug in and it sounds awesome. It does have a little high pass filter switch that I just enabled, and now it's not enabled anymore. But if you decide to get close to the Rode Podmic USB, which you know the sound of this very well by now, and then you decide to get close to the RE20, here's the sound of the proximity. And if we decide to DoorDash some pickled penises to eat with our pickled penises, here's how that's going to sound. Now, since the RE20 is a totally badass microphone, the Rodecaster Pro 2 has a processing profile built in. So this is actually the sound of the Rodecaster Pro 2 processing for the RE20, versus the Rode Podmic USB and the DSP that is built in. Now we have the Electro Voice RE20 sibling, the RE320. And the reason that I did want to include this is that the 320 actually goes for $299, so it's at least a little bit closer in price to the Rode Podmic USB that comes in at $199. I bet you didn't know that. But the RE320 does have this little filter on it. I think it's called like the kick drum switch, but that's enabled now versus the Podmic USB, just to give you the idea of how this microphone can sound. But if you get really close to the Rode Podmic, I bet you knew this is how it was going to sound. And here is how the RE320 sounds when you're really close to it. Now, if you decide to go to the gas station, they have that big jar. You put your hand in it and grab a pickled penises. Now you got pickled peanuts' juice all over you. Oh, hate it when that happens. Before the RE320 processing that I just enabled, I just kept it on the RE20 profile, even though they do sound different. But here's also a little sample with the kick drum switch enabled. But that is, of course, going up against the built-in DSP of the Rode Podmic USB. Uh-oh, now we have a sibling battle happening here. We've got the Rode Procaster going into the Rodecaster Pro 2 versus, you guessed it, or you didn't guess it, you got it wrong. What happened? We've been doing this a lot, man. Come on, get it together. Versus the Rode Podmic USB. Now, the Rode Procaster, I always have a hard time saying that versus Rodecaster, Procaster. It's hard. But the Rode Procaster actually goes for $229, so it's actually $30 more than the Podmic USB. But now let's get close for the millionth time to the Rode Podmic USB. And now we're close to the Rode Procaster. Here's how that sounds. Now here's a quick pickled peanuts test. Pickled peanuts. Now we have the DSP enabled for the Podmic USB. And of course, we are using the Procaster profile in the Rodecaster Pro. That was a really hard sentence for me. Do other people have that issue? It's hard for me to say those two. But here's just a real quick processing test for both of these microphones. This took way longer than I expected, so I'm actually going to have to do this in 2 sections. So now I have the Samson Q9X plugged in. This is the XLR version of the microphone that came out first, the Q9U, but that is also an XLR edition, but it's an XLR USB microphone. Now, the reason I didn't include the Q9U is that personally, I don't really recommend that microphone. I think the Q9X is a substantially better deal. This is $100 versus the Q9U, which I think is still $200. And I don't know if you knew this, but so is the Rode Podmic USB. It's also $199. But the Samson Q9X does have a mid-boost mode as well as a flat mode. You've been listening to the mid-boost mode, and you can tell that it definitely got darker when I just flip that to flat mode. But since most people leave mid-boost mode enabled, I'm just going to leave it like that for this. But if I decide to get really close to the Rode Podmic, like I've done 3 trillion times in this comparison, here's how it sounds. Now, if you get right on top of the Samson Q9X, here's how that sounds. Now, just a real quick pickled peanuts test. Just a pickled peanuts test. Now, both of these microphones have DSP enabled. The Q9X is getting processed by the Rodecaster Pro 2, just on its default dynamic microphone setting. And of course, the Podmic USB DSP is enabled. Now we're going with another Samson microphone. This is the Samson Q2U, which is in fact an XLR and USB microphone. It goes for $69.99, but you can sometimes find it for like $50. And of course, it's going up against the Rode Podmic USB that goes for $199. But I think since the Q2U has a long history of being a pretty solid XLR USB microphone for very inexpensive, people are curious how it would perform up against this. And speaking of performance, let's see how the proximity effect does on the Podmic USB. This is a new test. I've never done this in this video. And here's how it sounds when you get really close to the Samson Q2U. Now to test some pickled peanuts, just a quick pickled peanuts test. Now, I am using the Samson Q2U as a USB microphone, so I won't be doing a DSP or processing test since it doesn't have anything like that available. I turned on the Rode Podmic USB DSP anyway. Here's the sound of that versus the aging Samson Q2U. Just because it's getting a little bit older doesn't mean it ain't beautiful, okay? I'm going to be honest, it's like 2 in the morning and I am exhausted. I gotta finish this. Now, this microphone is the Maono PD400X, and it might be one of the bigger competitors to the Rode Podmic USB. And the reason I say that is that a lot of the time it actually goes for about $120 to $130. Currently, it's like $150 with a $10 coupon. But the Maono PD400X has different EQ settings. It has onboard DSP. It has the XLR and USB port, gain and headphone volume control. It's actually a really cool microphone. But if I get really close to the Rode Podmic and just eat this thing, here's how it sounds. And if I get really close to the Maono PD400X, Here's how it sounds. Now to test on some pickled peanuts and just take a quick listen to pickled peanuts. Now the onboard DSP for the Maono and the Podmic USB are both enabled. The Maono has a presence boost mode on and a compressor and a limiter, and then the same stuff that we've been using for the Podmic USB still applies here. But here's a real quick sound test between the Maono PD400X and the Rode Podmic USB. Now over here we have the Dynacaster P08. It's kind of oddly priced. It's usually between $50 to $80, usually closer to $50 to $60 though. Versus, of course, the microphone that you know so damn well now, the Rode Podmic USB that goes for $199. The Dynacaster P08 is only XLR. It is not an XLR USB or a USB microphone. But I mean, the Podmic is essentially 4 times more expensive. But speaking of 4 times, what if I get 4 times closer to this? And here's a little proximity effect test. And now here's a proximity effect test for the Dynacaster P08. Now I'm just going to throw some pickled peanuts at these. Just a real quick pickled peanuts test. Right now we have the Dynacaster going into the Rodecaster Pro 2 with just the standard dynamic microphone processing on it. And of course we have the Rode Podmic USB with DSP enabled. So here's just a real quick comparison between the Rode Podmic USB and the Dynacaster P08. Now we have the very inexpensive FiFine K669D plugged in versus the Rode Podmic USB. But the K669D is currently on Amazon for $36.99 with like a 5% off coupon. And then over here you got the Rode Podmic USB for $199. The K669D is in fact only an XLR microphone, so you would need some sort of audio interface mixer or recorder to use it. But now I'm getting really close to the Rode Podmic USB, and now I'm really close to the FiFine K669D. Rode Podmic USB K669D, that rhymes, that's cute! And now I'm going to torture these microphones with some pickled peanuts. Just punish them with some pickled peanuts. Now we have the processing and DSP enabled for both of these microphones. With the Rodecaster Pro 2, I'm just using the dynamic microphone setting. And of course, I'm using the standard settings for the Rode Podmic USB going into Rode Connect. So here's a real quick test with 2 microphones that are very different in price. Let's move to the next one. Now we have a USB exclusive microphone. This is the Deity VO7U. It is that broadcast style dynamic microphone, kind of like the Rode Podmic USB. Now, as you know, the Rode Podmic USB does come with an XLR port. The Deity does not have that. Also, it doesn't have DSP, it doesn't have a fancy windscreen, and some of the features that make the Rode Podmic USB kind of stand out. But the VO7U does have a limiter that comes in after a certain amount of gain. I believe it's like 30%. And also it does have lights, and some people like lighting. The VO7U comes in at $169 versus the $199 that you've heard about so many times. Now if I get close to the Rode Podmic USB, here's how it sounds versus the proximity effect on the Deity VO7U. Now to test the provided windscreens with plosives, here's some pickled peanuts. How are these provided windscreens doing with pickled peanuts? Now, even though the VO7U does not have DSP, it does have the little limiter enabled. It doesn't really sound like it's compressed or anything, but we'll just put it up against the DSP on the Rode Podmic USB just so we can showcase everything that this mic is capable of. Now, just to compare the Rode Podmic USB to as many mics as possible, now I'm just going to do some rapid fire tests. Just some real quick back and forth with microphones that maybe aren't as much of competitors, but are still dynamic microphones that people could consider. But here is the $20 Behringer XM8500 versus the Rode Podmic USB. But now we have the very popular Shure SM57, which is usually used as an instrument microphone, but we're still going to put it up against the Rode Podmic USB just for fun. Let's do it. It's a $100 microphone versus $199. Now we have maybe even a more popular $100 microphone, the Shure SM58, more of a handheld dynamic microphone for live vocals, but we'll still put it up against this more broadcast style dynamic microphone, the Rode USB The Podmic USB, that's the one. I've only said it a million times. My brain hurts. Now we actually have a more expensive handheld dynamic microphone. This is the Telefunken M81 that goes for $250 versus the $50-ish less dollar microphone, the Rode Podmic USB. Now these two microphones are actually identically priced. This is the Electro Voice ND96. Once again, more of a handheld dynamic microphone, and it goes for $200 like the Rode Podmic USB also goes for around $200. Now we have yet another $100 handheld dynamic microphone. This is the Sennheiser E835, going against a microphone that's essentially 2 times the price, the Rode Podmic USB. I think it's finally starting to hit me that I have too many microphones. Now this is the TC Helicon GoXLR Mic, and I couldn't find the mount for it, so I just put it in the mic clip right here, and it seems to be working though, so it seems good. But this microphone actually goes for $159 versus the Rode Podmic USB that goes for more than that. You know the price. I'm not going to say it again. $199. Damn it! Now here is the $50-ish Zoom ZDM1 versus the Rode Podmic USB. And now that I've put just an absolute ton of microphones up against the Rode Podmic USB, now I'm going to go back and kind of split this comparison up, listen to it a little bit. Then I'm going to come back and just give you some final thoughts. I'm not going to really pin down what microphone I like the most because I don't really want to influence that. We all have our own ears, our own mind, our own preferences. We all have our own sleep schedule, and I'm totally messing mine up right now. It is oh no. It's 2:41 in the morning right now. I didn't need that. So I would rather you come to your own decision, but I kind of just want to come back, talk about the pricing a little bit more, how it fits in the market. With this video today, I mostly just wanted to show you some of the options that are out there. I kept the mics pretty similar. I did throw in a few different options, but I was kind of going with the assumption that a person that would watch this comparison video kind of had their mind made up that they wanted a broadcast style dynamic microphone. Because I know a lot of people really like this broadcast dynamic look. If you were like a pure audio lover, like audio first before anything, like nothing else matters, baby, then you probably hated that sentence that I said talking about the look of a microphone. But a lot of people, especially creators, really care about the look of a microphone. I mean, everything we do is on video now. I feel like the more videos I've made and uploaded to this channel, the more visually oriented I have become. Because I know people care about video and video quality. And a large majority of creators either don't want a microphone in their face or they want a really cool looking microphone. Which the Shure SM7b has told us that these are the cool looking microphones. The SM7b started a massive trend with the way these new dynamic broadcast style microphones look. But in this video, I just wanted to put a large focus on similar mics. But just in case you're mad that I didn't include more condenser microphones, guess what? I got one right here. This is the NT1 5th generation. It goes for about $50 more than the Podmic USB. And now I'll even plug in one additional condenser microphone, why not? This is the Lauten Audio LA220. It usually goes for about $359, but it does have a cool little high pass and low pass filter switch on it. After doing this comparison, I do still feel really good about where the Podmic USB fits in the market. It has so many features. It has the built-in DSP where you can mold and just shape the sound of this microphone to fit your voice. It has some really cool options. Do I think it's the best sounding microphone in this video? No, I don't. But I feel like it holds its own, especially when it comes to value and what it offers and brings to the table. I will say I do think the Podmic USB could be a little overrated as an XLR mic. It having an XLR port is absolutely a bonus, don't get me wrong. But I feel like the Podmic USB is mostly for someone who doesn't want to spend quite a bit of money on a Rodecaster Pro and an original pod mic. But they still want a very similar sound to that. And you can absolutely get something close through the USB connection on this microphone. So if you have a Rodecaster Pro 2 and you still want to get one of these as an XLR mic, I'm not saying don't, but I'm just saying I feel like the most value hits as a USB mic. But I am glad, even after doing my review of the Rode Podmic USB and having some time and doing this comparison, listening to the comparison a bunch, I'm happy that I do still feel the same about it. Also, I do really love this windscreen. I wish that they would sell it separately for the original Podmic owners. But I hope that this video helped you decide if one of these microphones could work for you. But it is kind of hard with comparisons because if I don't want it to be an hour-long video, I can't really give you all of the details. But comparisons are really nice so you can hear the microphones next to each other, and comparisons are pretty fun. And I hope that you at least had that. I hope you had fun. Well, that's enough out of this guy. Thank you for watching this video. A big thank you to all of the Audio Hotline members out there. You are the coolest kids on the block. And I'm just Jenny from the block. I'm tired. But thank you all for watching. I'll see you audio nerds next time.